Our last stop west of the Wallace Line was on Bali, in the town of Ubud. For better or for worse, Ubud is known as a tourist hotspot, and accordingly has many of the trappings and impacts on the natural world one would expect. If, however, you take even a brief walk outside the town and into the rice fields that surround it, the story changes very quickly, and a very large number of species for an urbanised, heavily travelled area can be found with relative ease. One species it's difficult not to find in the area is the Javan Munia, and these small, highly characterful birds form fairly significant flocks, which it sometimes feels fill every bush to the point that there shouldn't be any space left for leaves or branches. But there is still room for individuality. We encountered this bird several times during our time in Ubud, and at first we thought it was using a tool to preen its feathers. But on later inspection of the footage we captured, we discovered that this bird seemed to be quite happy and healthy, with a significant growth along its beak. Another common sight in the fields around the town, and I imagine a rather more welcome one to the farmers, is the striated swallow, which are insectivorous, and as you can see here, this fledgling is still being fed by one of its parents. Another species that I suspect the farmers are quite glad to see, the yellow-vented bulbul. The species is considered to be frugivorous. However, their general diet is extremely broad. And in addition to berries and small fruits, which are found in abundance around Ubud, they will also forage for seeds, although notably we did not observe them at any point foraging for crop seeds such as wheat or rice. And they will also take insects, such as this individual, which we observed beating the living daylights, frankly, out of a caterpillar before consuming it. While I expect it was unlikely to be necessary in this instance, they are also agile flyers and are quite capable of taking insects on the wing. This next bird was perhaps one of the most startling we observed in Ubud. Being originally from England, we are very much familiar, much as we would like not to be, with the feral rock dove or common pigeon, but it just really goes to show that however well you think you know a species, there is always something surprising. Regularly, while walking near Ubud, we could hear an eerie, fluting, warbling noise that appeared to have no particular source. And it took several days and the silence of Niepi for us to be able to film these pigeons in flight well enough to determine that it does in fact appear to be the noise they make while flying. Ubud sits at the confluence of two fairly significant rivers, and much of the surrounding land has been converted to rice paddies. As such, it is perhaps unsurprising that a truly staggering number of wading birds can be found around the town. These Javan pond heron are very much among the most visually striking, at least in their breeding plumage, which almost every individual we observed was displaying. But the wading species we found the most surprising was the intermediate and cattle egrets, which regularly throughout the day could be seen flying north to south and back again across the town. It took some time and some trial and error due to the idiosyncratic nature of streets in around Ubud, but we eventually found our way to the Petulu Heron Bird Colony Watch Point, ultimately a small raised viewing platform surrounded by trees. At first glance, that seemed to be about it, and we were prepared to write the trip off. But just before we were able to pack up to leave, a single, solitary egret finally arrived. It didn't take long for another to join it, and then, all of a sudden, there were egrets everywhere. They mostly landed initially in the palm trees, and each new arrival then spent some time observing the far thicker foliage trees nearby. Once they were satisfied, presumably, that there were no predators or other immediate threats, they alighted in these trees, and at this point, all hell broke loose. As it turns out, this colony is in fact a breeding colony, and the birds returning from their foraging are bringing food back to the nestlings. The trees around Petulu are positively thick, with dozens, if not hundreds, of egret and heron chicks, and the arrival of any parent with a mouthful of food is enough to set the entire colony off screeching and squawking. It is difficult to overstate just how loud these birds were, and at this point it may be worth turning your headphones or speakers down, as it's about to get a little loud in here. As one might expect, both the intermediate egret and the cattle egret were present in their breeding plumage, making it far easier for us to tell the two species apart than when they have been encountered together previously in their non-breeding plumage. It would of course be wonderful to pretend that the two species exist in a state of neighbourly cooperation and there is very little friction between them. In truth, however, the species do not appear to get along well at all. The chicks seem to spend much of their time not screaming for food, screaming at one another to jostle for space, possibly in the hope that an absent-minded parent stuffed full of fish will feed the wrong baby on its return from foraging. And the adults will also attack one another if they feel that their baby is under threat. And on a few occasions we observed adults of one species attacking chicks of another that was getting too close to its young. Frankly, given how tightly packed the birds were within these trees, and how they seemed to spend much of their time flapping and squawking whenever an adult with food was around, it is absolutely amazing that there weren't any more casualties. Beyond, of course, our eardrums. It is not often that we wear noise-cancelling headphones in the field. However, on this occasion, I think perhaps we should have. Any tourist guide to Ubud will tell you that no trip there is complete without a visit to the monkey forest. And we certainly observed a very large number of tourists heading to and from this attraction. We, however, elected not to visit it. After seeing on our brief walk past, the wild long-tailed macaques were being trained with treats to climb up tourists so they could take selfies. The monkeys have therefore come to associate humans with being fed and become very aggressive if you do not play by those rules, and are an absolute menace in the gardens at the south side of town, freely coming and going, raiding any vegetables or other foodstuffs they find. This is not to say they aren't wonderful and charming to observe, particularly the juveniles which haven't fully learned all of the awful behaviour we've taught them. But if you do see a large group of them in the street, make efforts to be elsewhere. Our final spot on Bali is the plantain or tricoloured squirrel. This particular individual was observed in tall trees over a very steep cliff edge, meaning any potential drop could easily have been 20 metres or more. Yet it seemed quite unconcerned as it foraged for either fruits or insects, and is a relative of the Prevost squirrel. The common genus name for both of them, Calasciurus, actually translates to beautiful squirrel, and we see no reason to dispute the name.